In 1966, a pretty conservative Irish politician of the time, a guy called Oliver J. Flanagan, would famously remark that there was no sex in Ireland before television. Now, that's a pretty crazy statement. It's obviously ludicrous. But I do think when we think about the past and our ancestors, say in the 19th century, we tend to think that they never had sex except when they wanted to have families. But that's not true. In many ways, they were just like us. And a couple of years ago, I was researching this pretty crazy story from the 19th century that happened actually in 1845, right on the eve of the Great Hunger, where there was a woman called Ellen Berkery who had an affair with her first cousin in the same room where her husband slept. And we know about it because Ellen's lover killed her husband, and it was this massive court case at the time. But when I was researching that story, I interviewed the historian Sarah Ann Buckley from Galway, and she's an expert in this area on the history of relationships and the family. And I asked Sarah about love, sex and marriage in the 19th century to try and understand the issue. And we started our conversation around the issue of arranged marriages because I would have thought in the 19th century people didn't really have relationships like we do today because a lot of marriages were arranged. Sarah Ann explained it to me like this.
So by the 1750s, in common with the elite, arranged marriages are the established practice. So that's across the class spectrum. And for these, there would have to be a dowry system in place. And it's probably one of the reasons that there is such a strong patriarchal family in both rural and urban Ireland in this time in the early 19th century.
So if most marriages were arranged and people couldn't choose their partners like we do today, I did wonder, did love as we understand it exist? So I asked Sarah Ann about this.
Love did exist. Some partnerships were based on love, but it was very much a case of a bit of luck.
Okay, so this is when the history gets really interesting. So we have a situation where most marriages are arranged and people have no control over their partners, but they did feel love like we do. So unsurprisingly, as Sarah Ann now explains, there was a lot of extramarital sex and affairs happening in Ireland in the 19th century.
People are having a lot more sex outside of their own marriage than perhaps we would have considered it from a 20th century perspective.
Now I think that'll challenge your perception of the past. It certainly challenged mine. But you might have one question. How do we know about this? People tend to keep affairs secret. Well, the answer is court cases. And Sarah Ann gave 3 examples of different court cases that could reveal extramarital affairs that have been kept hidden. Now the first is infanticide, the second is bigamy, where a person will be married to 2 different people at the same time. And then the third one is sodomy, and that revealed in some cases at least where people were having same-sex relationships. Sarah Ann talked me through this.
You know, in the case of infanticide, it's often unwanted pregnancies. In the case of bigamy, it's often men who have actually set up a whole other family. Sodomy cases are around a very possible desire for a same-sex relationship. But I'm sure there was quite a prevalence of extramarital affairs.
I found that interview really fascinating. It really changed my perception of life in the 19th century, where we often think things are kind of drab, boring, dull, that our ancestors were not like us. But as you can hear from that, in many ways, they're just exactly the same as we are today. Now, if you want to get more Irish history videos, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the bell to get the next video when it's out.